Jeremiah chapter 32 verses 1 to 3a and 6 to 15. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. The army of the king of Babylon was then besieging Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was confined in the courtyard of the guard in the royal palace of Judah. Now Zedekiah king of Judah had imprisoned him there, saying, "Why do you prophesy as you do?" Verse 6. Jeremiah said, "The word of the Lord came to me. Hanamel, son of Shallum, your uncle, is going to come to you and say, 'Buy my field at Anathoth, because as nearest relative it is your right and duty to buy it.'" Then, just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the guard and said, "Buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. Since it is your right to redeem it and possess it, buy it for yourself." I knew that this was the word of the Lord. So I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel and weighed out for him 17 shekels of silver. I signed and sealed the deed, had it witnessed, and weighed out the silver on the scales. I took the deed of purchase, the sealed copy containing the terms and conditions, as well as the unsealed copy, and I gave this deed to Baruch, son of Neriah, son of Maaseiah, in the presence of my cousin Hanamel and of the witnesses who had signed the deed, and of all the Jews sitting in the courtyard of the guard. In their presence I gave Baruch these instructions. "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Take these documents, both the sealed and unsealed copies of the deed of purchase, and put them in a clay jar, so that they will last a long time. For this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land." The second reading is Luke chapter 12. Sorry, it's like cold. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Some in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, 'You have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God.'" Here ends our readings. There's a story about a political figure, a diplomat from the 19th century called Charles Francis Adams. He kept a diary, and one day he entered, "Went fishing with my son today. A day wasted." But his son, Brooke Adams, also kept a diary, which also survived. And on that same day, Brooke Adams made this entry: "Went fishing with my father. The most wonderful day of my life." The father thought he was wasting his time while fishing with his son, but the son saw it as a wonderful investment. The only way to tell the difference between wasting and investing is to know what your ultimate purpose in life is. What does it mean, then, to make a good investment? Not just of money, an investment of time, an investment in relationships, investment building trust. What is a good investment rather than a waste? What does that look like? What would it mean to invest in God and in God's future? We're now on Sermon 5 of the Jeremiah series. We've had the Call and Temple sermon. That was the first one. We've had the potter and the clay. We've had the scroll being burned and rewritten. That was the last one that I did. We had the letter to the exiles last week. Now we come to a reading that probably doesn't sound very promising, very dramatic. Its title in many Bibles is just Jeremiah Buys a Field. If the whole prophet of Jeremiah was a box set that you were watching, you might be tempted to skip this episode. It doesn't sound very exciting. But so much would be missed if we did so. Throughout the book of Jeremiah so far, the prophet has been telling people, it's bad news. You keep on banging on about how great the temple is, but you're morally bankrupt. The orphans, widows and foreigners have been oppressed for too long. The Babylonian armies are coming to get us if we don't repent. And now these very armies are literally standing at the gates outside Jerusalem. The siege has begun. Jeremiah was right all along. Hear how the reading starts. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah. That was the king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, the king over the Babylonians. It goes on to say, the army of the king of Babylon was then besieging Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was confined in the courtyard of the guard in the royal palace of Judah. Jeremiah's reward for being right is that he's been put in prison. But even there, God is still speaking to him. Now God tells Jeremiah to look out for his cousin Hanamel, who will be coming to sell him a field. Then, just as the Lord has said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the guard and said, buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. Since it is your right to redeem it and possess it, buy it for yourself. Now, in that culture and in the legal system at that time, it was very important to keep a piece of land inside an extended family. If someone in your family wasn't able to afford to keep maintaining their land and was at the point where they were forced to sell it, then if you were their relative, you had a duty to buy it off them if you could, to keep it inside the family. That way it could still be passed as an inheritance to other members of the same family in the future. Why does this matter? Well, if you live off the land by livestock and farming, then having land to grow food literally is a matter of life and death. These rules were meant to prevent a bad harvest or a difficult year, resulting in one family getting completely impoverished and losing their land and becoming slaves, while another family might then buy up all the land and get really wealthy. It was meant to be a form of social equality, of keeping social mobility possible, of ensuring each family had land to grow its own food. Maintaining your family's collective inheritance then was a serious obligation. And then we have lots of details about how exactly Jeremiah carried out his obligation, because he did indeed buy the land. There's a deed, that's the contract. There's the price, that's the 17 shekels of silver that he weighs out. There are the witnesses. In Jeremiah's case, because he's in prison, that's all the other prisoners. Then there are the official documents, and here it gets a bit confusing. In that time, if you had a really important contract, you'd have two copies of it. There'd be a sealed copy, and there'd be an unsealed copy. The sealed copy would be rolled up, and you'd put a wax seal on it. So you'd have a layer of wax, which you'd then stamp with a seal to show that the party sealing it was an authentic, genuine party to the transaction. When I preach this in church, there will be pictures. If I can, I will upload pictures along with this recording. I'm not sure yet. But we have many examples of surviving stamps and also very large seals. They could be very intricate and hence difficult to fraudulently to forge. So you'd have two copies, and you'd keep the unsealed one, the open one, for public record so that people could check the details. Then if there was a dispute, you could go and fetch the one that was sealed with the wax seal of both of the participants, and you could, with witnesses, unseal the sealed one and check the original, because you know both parties must have agreed to that because their seals were on it. I hope that makes some kind of sense. But you've got basically a contract, it's copied, duplicated, and then it's all placed in a clay jar. Originally, you just put the sealed one in the clay jar and bury it somewhere to keep it safe, like a sort of ancient filing system. But in this case, because the city is literally under siege and the army is at the door, they put both in a clay jar to bury it. The point of this whole procedure is that Jeremiah is making a significant investment here. He is getting rid of his cash, his silver, just at a time when an army is about to invade the city. He's buying a field off his cousin to help his cousin out, at a time when an army has probably marched right across it. Humanly speaking, it seems like a completely mad thing to do. But this is really a story about hope for the future and investment in that future. Jeremiah has spent the first several years of his prophetic ministry telling everyone that they are doomed. But now the army has actually turned up. Now it sits right on the doorstep. Now it's clear that they will destroy the city and ransack the houses and take many people into exile and destroy the temple. Now he starts investing in local property. In a way, Jeremiah must have seemed to everyone completely infuriating. Our passage ends with words of hope from Jeremiah. This is what verse 15 says. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Houses, fields and vineyards will again be bought in this land. In other words, there will be economic life here again. Yes, there will be a gap, a time of exile and destruction, but after that, there will be restoration and buying and selling and common life. Buying that field is a message of hopefulness for the future. Now that Judah stands right on the brink of complete annihilation, Jeremiah is looking forward to the stage after this one, forward to a future in God, a future of hope. Now, it's been my privilege recently to have lots of different families inquire about baptism, and I've gone to visit a few different families recently, as indeed I have throughout my time here. One theme that has come up recently and comes up often is about hope in a difficult world. You're often talking to parents who've just brought into the world a beautiful, vulnerable little baby. And the questions they often have, or that come up in discussion, is, what is this world that I've brought my baby into? Where does this greed come from? Where does this violence come from? When will there be an end to this conflict? Why is the world like this? When my child is so sweet and so perfect, why haven't we provided for them somewhere better? I can always associate with that, and it always leads to a fruitful discussion about sin at the heart of humankind. But we're still called to be people who trust in the future, people who act with hope. And so I try to talk about Christian hope in those visits too, a hope based not on humans and our capacity to improve, to get better, but hope based on the grace of God. Corrie ten Boom, she was Dutch, she sheltered and protected Jewish people during the Holocaust. She said this: never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. What we know is the God who's revealed himself in Jesus Christ. What is unknown is what humanly will happen in the future, but God's future can always be trusted. So Jeremiah is choosing to invest in God's future that he has revealed, in God's restoration, even though humanly speaking it seems like what he's doing is mad. There's this similar theme of investment in our gospel reading. Someone in the crowd wants Jesus to settle an argument he's having with his brother about their inheritance. Maybe they too have been left a field. Maybe they're trying to work out how to divide it, how to put it to work. Jesus doesn't bother sorting out the property dispute. He tells them, be on guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And then he tells a parable about a rich man whose land produced an unexpectedly good harvest. He could have given away the excess, used it to provide for the poor or to make friends, but instead he chose to pull down his barn and to build bigger ones to store everything. In the logic of the parable, he was a fool, because that very night he died. It's worth spending a minute thinking, why was he a fool? He was foolish because he thought that having many possessions would guarantee him long life. That's why he said to himself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Verse 19. But that's not how it works. Life may seem to us to be so frail and vulnerable that many possessions are required to secure it. But those possessions are actually frailer than the life itself. Jesus instead tells us that the way forward is to be rich towards God. Being rich towards God means responding to God in faith and also to share that which we have but don't need. If life truly is a gift from God, if every day is simply gift, then we are free to be generous, free to avoid greed. Jeremiah understood this too. The people of Judah were facing great judgment through the armies of Babylon because of their social injustice. But there would be life and a future for them because of God's grace. So Jeremiah, who, while things were all fine and dandy, was shouting in the temple about the forthcoming disaster, greets the start of that disaster by buying a field, announcing that there would be a time of calm and peace and restoration that would eventually come, and investing in it, putting his money where his mouth was. So what about us? Just like those baptism families I've seen recently, many of us feel wary about the future. We have a choice. We can choose to invest in God's future, to share out that which we have but do not need, to walk on in hope for what God will restore, to continue to strive for generosity and mercy and kindness. Or we can give in to despair and nihilism, to just try to keep my head down, to share as little as I can, so I can keep everything for me just in case I need it. It is tempting to believe in nothing, to trust no one. If you believe in nothing, then nothing will ever disappoint you. But if we believe in nothing, then we miss out on what God is doing. God is building his kingdom, and we are called to invest our hearts and our minds, and yes, in their own way, also our wallets, in that kingdom. That 19th century politician Charles Francis Adams, he felt like the day he spent fishing with his son was a complete waste of time. But it turns out that it was a precious investment in his relationship with his son, even though he couldn't see it. Jeremiah, always one step ahead of the people of Judah, saw a time beyond exile when there would be restoration and community once again. Whatever darkness and conflict you may be facing, whatever global and international violence and despair we might be encountering, God has a future for us, his kingdom. To invest in that future means to seek him and to serve him, and to follow in his ways and to walk his paths today. In that future, the fruit of obedience will come. Amen. In church, we'll be following this sermon with the song, "My Hope is Built on Nothing Less Than Jesus' Blood and Righteousness." There is a solid foundation in a changing and alarming world, and it is not us. It is Jesus Christ crucified and risen and ascended, who beckons us into a future with God. So if you're at home, I invite you to find that song and sing it. Amen.